Hi, my name's Ben Lackey. I'm a partner architect with DataStax, and today I'm going to show you how to use the Azure CLI to deploy a DataStax cluster. So let's get started. Let me close that and flip over to a web browser. So first off, I'm not going to assume you have the Azure CLI yet. So if you do a Google search for Azure CLI install, the first result will be this really helpful article from Microsoft on how to install it. So this goes through their different installers. I actually usually do an npm install, and you can go through and do that. There's also a Docker container that has it pre-installed as well, but I usually find it's nice to have it running locally. So once it's installed locally, you can go over to your command line and log in to the CLI. Those instructions cover that. And if everything is working all right, you should be able to run the command Azure group list. And that actually goes out to Azure, it connects, and it sees what resource groups you have running and lists all those off. So you can see that worked. So I have a working Azure CLI now. Next thing I need to do is I need to make a copy of the ARM Azure Resource Manager templates for deploying DataStax. And if I switch back to a web browser, over here, these are the ARM templates. They're up on GitHub, they're publicly available, they're under DataStax Partner Network and then Azure so forth. DataStax Partner Network also has other templates that may be interesting, but these ones are Azure specific. So if I click this copy to clipboard link right here, I can then copy the entire repo. And one thing I should mention, we've had various pull requests on the repo. We've had people collaborate. That's great. If you see things in this that you want changed, by all means contribute. Really appreciate it. So in my home directory, I'm going to type the command git clone and then paste that URL. So I should probably call that out. I'm also assuming you have the git command line tools installed, and those are really helpful for interacting with GitHub. So hit enter, and it goes out and downloads some things. Now, if I do an ls locally, you can see I have a new directory, Azure Resource Manager DSE. So I'm going to change directory into that, hit clear again, ls, and there are a couple things in here. There's that marketplace folder that has the create UI def wrapper that we use in our Azure Marketplace offer. Not really very interesting or useful outside of Marketplace. It's more left there so you can inspect it and understand that the things we're doing in Marketplace are just a wrapper around the things we have here. Specifically, the Marketplace offers a wrapper around the single DC folder we see here. But since you're looking at the command line, my assumption is you want to do something more interesting than just a single DC. So let's change directory into multi-DC and do an ls, and you see a couple things here. One's a deploy script, so I can cat the deploy script, and this is kind of our main entry point. It creates a resource group that's a container for all our different artifacts. It then runs a Python program that generates an ARM template. We do this because it's a lot more flexible than static JSON. It allows us to generate multi-data center configs, allows us to do more complex things with storage accounts and disks than would otherwise be possible. And then finally, it runs this command, Azure Group Deployment Create, and it creates a deployment with the generated template that's saved into this directory. There's a note here that it uses clusterparameters.json. So let's take a look at clusterparameters.json real quick. So that has a list of locations, and that can be any number of locations, a number of nodes to create in each location, a VM size to use. In this case, we're using a D1 V2. I stress D1, not recommended for prod, not recommended for dev, really just recommended for testing out deployments. That's about all it's good for. If you put any significant query load against it, all kinds of strange things will happen. So really don't recommend that. Finally, there's a username and password. These are going to be the username and password for our machines once they're all built and running. So if I want to deploy this 3DC 10-node cluster, all I do is /deploy the name of a resource group. So I'm going to call it Ben1, and I hit enter. It goes away, it creates the resource group, and now it creates the deployment. And this, once it's creating the deployment here, is actually going to run asynchronously. So even if my network connection to Azure fails, the deployment will likely still complete in the background. At this point, let's flip back to our web browser and look at one other thing. So if we go back here, before that, let's see, it's 5:49 p.m. So let's remember that number, because that'll tell us how long this whole thing took. So I'm going to go over to resources.azure.com, log into my work account, that's my Active Directory enabled account, redirect to my Okta single sign-on, hit sign in, and now I'm in resources.azure.com. This really nice tool for viewing what my deployments look like. Drill down, I see Ben1 already. So it's already made a bunch of stuff for Ben1. Some virtual machines, an availability set. Oh, 3 availability sets, right. 1 for each location. VMs, 10 of them in each location. Only 1 node to run Ops Center, the administrative tool, and so on. So, at this point, I'm going to pause our recording, and I'll resume it once the deployment's completed, and we can take a look at the finished cluster. See you soon. All right, so we're back. It's 6:20, 6:21 now, so it took roughly 30 minutes to run the deployment. And that completed, and it output this URL here. So if we go to this URL, we'll be able to see our newly deployed DataStax cluster. I'll copy that, go over to a web browser, paste that in, hit enter. It says loading Ops Center. Okay, so it's giving this error saying some agents failed to connect. This is an intermittent error we see with Ops Center. It's due to a concurrency issue that'll be fixed in an upcoming release. We can do 2 things. We can either ignore this, or we can go reset Ops Center, restart Ops Center, and it'll probably go away. For now, I'm just going to dismiss it and ignore the warning. And you can see here this cluster health. It says East US, Central US, West US. There are 10 nodes in each. So I'm still kind of amazed how amazing this is. It took about 30 minutes, and we deployed 30 machines across the US, geographically distributed, and they're in a database cluster. And if you think back even 5 or 10 years ago, this would have taken literally months to do. Well, really neat. And it was all done automatically. If we click over here, we can see a view of the cluster. I'm going to zoom out a little, and the different nodes in it, each in 10 in East, 10 in Central, and 10 in West. And on East here, you can see the spacing's a little less even. And the spacing is indicative of how much data each node has on it. In our case, the total database size is like 1.7 meg. It's basically just a little logging information. So even small differences can lead to large visual differences when we look at this. Right. So let's real quick go restart Op Center and just see if that fixes the problem. So I'm going to copy that URL there, and I'll hit clear here. Now SSH to DataStax at that. Let me remove the leading HTTP here. All right, like this. And say, yes, I do want to connect. Enter my password I specified earlier in. And I believe it'll be sudo service opcenter d restart. There it goes. Restarting Cassandra Cluster Manager opcenter d. All right, let's go back to the web browser and see if that helped. So hit refresh. Okay, yeah, now it's talking to the agents correctly. And this is an intermittent issue we see. Doesn't affect the database performance, and as I mentioned, will be fixed in an upcoming release. One thing that's kind of interesting is a couple of these nodes have gone yellow, which means they're under load. As I mentioned, we started with D1 nodes, single core nodes. So even a small amount of load, in this case probably Op Center writing to the database, can cause them to show under load. So that's where we are. Multi-data center cluster all set, deployed with a single command from the Azure CLI. I'll set up a couple other videos to show how to debug failed deployments, as well as recommended next steps once you have a new cluster. See you then.